Hello, fight fans, and welcome to the Combat Challenge podcast. I'm pleased to have two brothers on today's podcast. Both compete at Bellator MMA promotions. One is a featherweight athlete and the other is a lightweight athlete. I give you Mr. Harry the Houdini Hardwick and George Hardwick. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast, my brothers.
Thank you for having us.
Harry, if I can start with you first, my friend. I've noticed you've got a fight name, the Houdini. So if you can tell us a little bit about how that fight name came about, please.
Well, initially I was the Wizard. People were Harry the Wizard Hardwick because of Harry Potter, and it's like a skinny, nerdy-looking white kid who sort of has a bit of a Harry Potter vibe. But I didn't like having the Wizard because it was, there's Matt Hume and there's Mark Weir. There's a lot of fighters with that nickname already that I think, I can't take that. But then I fought jiu-jitsu black belt Robbie Fallon. And I had the most, it was in Manchester, and I had the most horrendous first round ever. Like, he had me in an armbar, in an omoplata, in a das, he had me in a mount, he had me in a face bar, he had me in like a Japanese necktie. He had me in all these submissions, and I just, through like sheer stubbornness, I sort of weaseled my way out of them. And then I knocked him out in the start of the second round. And then Johnny Hull, one of our training partners, on the drive back to the hotel, was like, Harry Houdini, the escape artist thing. And then that's how it stuck.
And George, I've noticed you don't have a fight name. Can I ask why not?
I don't know, because fight names, they're not my decision. No one picks their own fight name. And if they do, they're a nonce. So you kind of got to let someone like cement a nickname for you and give it to you. And no one's like cemented a nickname for me. In terms of like gym nicknames, I just get called Gio. There was a Muay Thai fight, like a junior championship fight. It was in Salford at one point. And when I entered, the announcer's card just said Gio on it. It didn't say George Hardwick. It just said Gio. I didn't pick my entrance song either. So he just shouts Gio, and then Nicki Minaj starts blasting. So Gio... It's a good song, that Starship.
Yeah, it was a good song.
Yeah, in terms of nicknames, that's the only one people like call me in the gym or something, Gio. Other than that, they just call me like dickhead or nonce or something like that.
Oh, okay. So quite pleasing names then, right? It's quite affectionate names.
Uncle Tony used to call you Judge. George the Judge Hardwick. That might work.
God, could I end up in decision all the time? Because I go to decision too much.
Well, you're on that journey, aren't you, George? And at some stage, I'm sure a fight name will be cemented by someone as you go along. Talking about MMA journeys, if I can ask you both, and this is something I ask everyone because fight fans are interested in knowing how how athletes have ended up where they are now. So if I can invite Harry first, if you can just tell me a little bit about your journey as to how you ended up where you are now when you started your martial arts journey, please.
Yeah, so I was 15, I think. I was like 14 or 15, and I tagged along to a kickboxing class with my mate who was a kickboxer, like shiny pants kickboxing with no low kicks or anything. And I actually remember when I mentioned to someone at school that I was going to go kickboxing with my friend, and she actually like laughed at my face because it just seems, well, like, I was sort of nerdy little timid kid. And it was like, that doesn't seem like something you'd do. And now, yeah, I've ended up doing it for a living. But so I went to that for a bit, and then we both started Muay Thai a little while after that, like a couple of weeks after that. And we both did Muay Thai exclusively for about 3 years. It was weird because we were really into MMA, but it was just when Crew Kin and Stephen Long were teaching at Teesside Muay Thai, it was just, we just thought, this is so good. We've got it so good here. We'll just stay and train. But then Stephen Long left Teesside Muay Thai to teach Muay Thai at Middlesbrough Fight Academy. So we just tagged along with him and then just started joining in some of the MMA classes. And then the rest is history. Like I've not stopped training since, really.
So there's three sections there. There was one, the kickboxing side. What made you move from kickboxing to Thai boxing?
Because he copied me. I started the Muay Thai first. I went to Muay Thai like 2 or 3 weeks, and then Harry
No,
just.
I don't. No. I started kickboxing one day before we both started Muay Thai.
Yeah, well, he still copied me.
Right. The main thing I think was like the shiny pants kickboxing without the low kicks and without it didn't seem as, I know it might sound a bit silly to say this, but it didn't seem as like real as Muay Thai, where you could kick the leg and you could clinch and you could land knees and stuff. And then I think I sort of fit in more with the Muay Thai gym banter. I don't know if that's it's under talked about, but like fitting in with the banter of a place is quite an important
For sure.
important part of like why people might stay at a certain team, why people might get good results at one team, where another person might get, they might just Mike. It's probably why Mike Perry doesn't get any results anywhere, because he doesn't fit in with anyone.
Well, he did it all right on one of his fights when did he have his girlfriend in his corner, and he did all right in that one.
Yeah, but yeah.
It's not saying much when it's against Mickey Gall.
Yeah, it was Mickey Gall. They were both horrendously tired by about the 3-minute mark, and it was a bit. I've seen better fights outside of kebab shops in Borough. Although we've got quite a high standard of kebab shop fight up in Middlesbrough.
And for you, George, did you start your martial arts journey before or after Harry, and was it a similar journey that you were on?
Well, I started Muay Thai before Harry by like a few days apparently. But the reason I started is I just realized when I was in like year 8 or something at school, I just thought I do nothing at the minute. Like I'd go to school, come home, and then play on the PS2 for about 6 hours at a time, and then go to bed. It just was like, oh, I'm not doing anything. I guess I like boxing, so Google boxing. Closest one was Muay Thai boxing, so I just went there. Thought, oh, that's good.
And then from the Thai boxing, obviously you said you moved along with Steve because he went to Middlesbrough Fight Academy, right? And then were you kind of looking at what was going on there, and did that kind of pique your interest, and then you focused on that as well?
When we went to MFA, it was like almost immediate. We just started doing grappling as well, and then it took us a little while to realize, oh, we've got it really good here. Like Abdul Mohammed is just amazing coach, and his real strength is the area that's a lot of UK fighters' weakness. His real strength is wrestling, and just his general, like the fundamentals that Abdul will teach are just so good, and they're so universal as they work from like the lowest level to the highest level. The stuff you hear him say, and then you see it in fights way down the line, and then there's stuff he was talking about for ages, and then Khabib just starts doing it all in the UFC, and we're like, yeah, Abdul probably knows his stuff.
Yeah, and sometimes you could look at a trainer like that and think, what's he on about? It's not clicking with me right now, but they're talking from their experience, right? And they're a little bit further on that journey.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to have that confidence in that trainer and think, what he's telling me, it might not make sense to me, but there's some method behind what he's saying, right?
Yeah. And then, yeah, and he still mucks in. Like he's some mystery age near 50 at the minute. Like we genuinely, no one knows his age.
And he throws us around. Every time we wrestle, we get suplexed, we get slammed still,
Yeah.
We're like I bumped into Abdul a couple of times when I was on MC'd on some of the shows, and I think he was doing security on, I think it was it Freak Show? I think I remember seeing him.
He would do security. He would be working the security, and then he would just corner us with his badge on and everything.
That's the one. And he always reminds me of like a miniature version of Randy Couture.
Well, I think that's his favourite fighter from back in the day. So.
Is it really? And
I think that's one of his favourite fighters, yeah.
Every time I used to see Abdul, I used to say to him, brother, I've got to make you laugh, because you don't even smile, do you? He's a man of few words.
Oh, you know, no, he's probably the funniest person I know. I'm not even, because he's got a good balance of it. His banter is really good.
Is it like quite a dry sense of humour?
Yeah, that's like, but even like he's got good banter, but he's also just unintentionally hilarious all the time as well. But yeah, we see him smiling all the time. Like,
yeah, there's just like a getting to know him. You know, a lot of people who start in the gym like a bit intimidated, but
There is that cheeky smile he'll do though, like when he'll catch someone in a submission or something, and it'll be like some horrendous like. Do you know? Have you seen one of his favorite ones is where they're like it's a rear naked choke, but where they don't have the hooks in or anything. You're like your back's flat on the floor, and you're getting crunched in like this. Right. I've seen him like do that to people who've like visited the gym, and then after like they tap, and then afterwards he goes, "That's a bad move."
So, how many years ago was that when you started at Middlesbrough Fight Academy?
Late 2015, I believe, or late 2016.
No, it was late 2012.
No, not
Middlesbrough Fight. Yeah,
I can't remember.
George, I fought pro in 2015.
Oh yeah, 2012.
And the other coaches there at Middlesbrough Fight Academy, can you tell me a little bit about them and what do they bring to the fight camp?
So our main other coach is Peter Irving, who's based in Newcastle. So we'll travel up to his gym, Newcastle Fight Centre, and he'll travel like down to Middlesbrough. So he's mainly like jiu-jitsu coach for us. He'll game plan like more broadly in MMA, but he's mainly like our jiu-jitsu coach at the minute and like really breaking down the details of every position and like how it applies to MMA. He's not just a jiu-jitsu coach who'll teach you moves based for sports jiu-jitsu and like getting points that doesn't carry over really well to MMA. It's really, really, really well adapted to MMA.
And the good thing about Pete is he's competed for many years as well. You know, he's competed in MMA, so he kind of knows what to bring in the tool bag when it comes to without wearing the gi and what can work, right?
Yeah. Well, him and Abdul were like training partners back in the day, and because Pete wasn't always part of Middlesbrough Fight Academy and part of our team, he actually cornered against me for 2 of my amateur fights.
Right. Okay.
But my very first AMI MMA fight, I had Thai boxing fights, but it was like 6 months of grappling training, and I managed to like fluke the fight a bit by being really tough and just like landing loads of knees. And I get on top in the 3rd round, and I start just landing this proper crap ground and pound because I didn't know what I was doing. But Abdul just stops cornering me for a second because him and Pete go way back and they're good mates, and he just goes, "Hey Peter, he's smashing your boy." Like yelling it across the cage. Oh.
But like you said, that's his sort of sense of humor, right?
Oh yeah, there's too many examples.
So you've got
the best one.
That's one of the funniest ones. But yeah, it was we had a jiu-jitsu coach from Middlesbrough who was at our gym, Jamie Taylor, you know, really good jiu-jitsu coach. But he left to sort of start his own thing. And when he left, Abdul was like, I'll just get Pete. He just messaged him about the blue, and Pete was like, yeah, really enthusiastic. And now, like we wouldn't have had our Bellator fights if it wasn't for Pete, because he also does a lot of stuff like behind the scene, like messaging people and like getting in touch with people, and he knows these promoters and he knows these matchmakers. So there's that side to what Pete does as well, which is really, really important, but it goes a bit unseen and a bit unnoticed.
Yeah, well, like no matter how good you are as a fighter, unless there's people there that can see you or people that can open the doors for you, you struggle to make that contact. And it seems like Peter's got those contacts that can help get you on to where you are, right?
Yeah, like we definitely wouldn't have fought in Bellator if it wasn't for Pete constantly pestering the matchmaker beforehand. Like you're just sending messages all the time, like, I've got these lads, they're good, they're this, they're just doing this. I know you wanted him on Bellator, well, he's just finished him, so like that kind of thing.
Well, good on him. You've got the Abdul Muhammad as the wrestling side. You've got Pete for the jiu-jitsu. Is anyone you still work with from the striking side to help you sharpen those tools?
Well, both of those still like contribute to the striking as well. So they've both done Muay Thai for ages, and Abdul's trained Muay Thai longer than us, and Pete's had like 40 Muay Thai and kickboxing fights.
Oh, I didn't know that, right? I didn't know they've got the striking background as well.
But a lot of our striking and padding is for each other.
Yeah, we're sort of like we've got a lot of other influences we can dip into. So we've got Richie Smullen, who's a fantastic boxing coach from Newcastle, who we started working with. Joe Crowther, a guy from Stockton, from Holloway, who's going to turn professional in boxing, who's a really good guy to work with. Stephen Long was our coach before problems. We can't go into these, but we've got like Anth Brown from our gym. Like, as much as he's a total fucking moron, he like, and he really does know his stuff, and he can give us stuff. But a lot of our planning and our coaching is sort of for each other. We both have a fight, or one of us has a fight, and we start kicking up like the pads and the intensity of the pads. It's like we're each other's main padmen. Yeah, and people like sort of go, oh, just padmen. Oh, it's just pads. So like, what we hold, I would say we're among the top 5% best padmen in the world. I would say that right now, because most people just sort of do it as an exercise. Like, we can make pads almost like it's almost like a sparring session. Like, there's tons of movement going off. We're getting so much done in such a short space of time. We're training our footwork. We're training our reflex. We're still working the combinations. We're still maintaining a lot of the skills we have while building new skills.
And it helps having that like decade of holding pads for each other, where we don't have to stop in the middle of a round. Okay, do this, this, and this. It's just that sort of connection between the pad man and the one hitting the pads.
Yeah, and it's like because we throw plenty while holding the pads, we throw plenty back at each other, but we know how not to be a total douche about it. Because I have seen some pad men who throw stuff back, but it's almost just to like be like, just like, oh, I'll get them to throw something and I'll boot them. Whereas we throw stuff back in a way to condition each other to certain things that our opponent's going to do.
You kind of tweaking each other's skills, and you're kind of working each other, and you know each other, and you're kind of going on to autopilot for each other, right?
Yeah, it's like a guided autopilot with bad, because we're still coaching and there's still stuff we got to work on. And there's still stuff so it's like we've been holding pads for each other that long, where we can go into autopilot well enough where we can sort of it's almost like we're watching each other. Like, I'm watching myself hold pads for George, and then I can go, okay, this needs adjusting, this needs adjusting, this needs sorting out, or we need to work a bit more of this, or his opponent's probably going to throw low kicks if he steps like that and starts jabbing like this, so I need to get him checking, I need to get that kind of thing going.
Well, that's a skill in itself, to be able to do that and to refer to each other as coaching. The reason I say that as well with the coaching side, when I was doing my research on both of you, and you were shown as your coaches as having Abdul Muhammad, Pete Irvin, and then each one had the other brother as a coach. And now I understand why, because of the amount of investment that you do for each other as well, right?
Yeah.
On the flip side, like our last fight, we both fought on the same show. We both fought Bellator Milan. It can make it tricky because we normally corner each other.
Yeah, like I fought first, so I didn't have George in my corner, which was a bit, because that was the first time I hadn't had George in my corner in any professional fight. Like, I've had professional kickboxing fights as well. And even when George wasn't training, which is a story we might have to get onto at some point, when George wasn't training MMA for about a year and a half, he still cornered me. Like, that's sort of just how it was. But yeah, it was weird, but it is what it is. I still, even though my elbow was like totally wrecked off of elbowing Smullen in his absolute concrete head, I still made sure to hold pads for George after my fight, and it just knocked my elbow even worse, but it was worth it.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. And that was a Bellator in Milan, right? You said?
Yeah.
So on that one, Harry, was that the fight against Richie Smullen?
Yes.
Okay. Can you just talk us a little bit about the prep that you did for Richie and how the fight went and what was the end result, please?
The prep went good. I've got no excuses about it. I just made some really bad decisions early in his best 2 rounds, because Smullen, like, I would say hands down, is probably the strongest guy I've ever fought. Like, really good, gritty, tough fighter. And he made his game plan work, whereas I didn't make my game plan work until the 3rd round, where I feel like if I'd have started to just box with him a little bit earlier, I'd have probably won. But yeah, it was a good experience overall, because when we got to Milan, they quarantined us in in this really nice hotel for about 5 days beforehand. So it was like we couldn't leave, but it was the nicest prison you could ever ask for. And then there was the no crowd thing was interesting, but only like when you walk out. When the fight starts, you don't really notice. You don't
Well,
care.
I'm sure you zoned in the night. You once the fight's there, and maybe it's an advantage because you can hear your corner a little bit more louder and a bit more clear, right?
Yeah, well, you can hear both corners as well. You sort of listen to what their corner's saying. Like, I do remember at one point I was holding the guillotine on, which I probably should have used to start scrambling up. I was being a little bit too jiu-jitsu. So I was like a bit too comfortable on my back, a bit too like, oh, he's not damaging me. I'm not, I can attack this stuff. Whereas I should just thought, oh, fuck this, I need to get up to my feet. But I do remember a point where I was holding onto the guillotine and I heard Kavanagh going, he's burning his arms out. I'm like, I can hold on to this for like 20 minutes. I have a really good squeeze on my left arm.
You've got no muscles to burn out. That's why. There's nothing there.
But
that was a good Irish accent there, my friend. That was good. So it was one of the SBG lads that you fought?
Both of us fought SBG lads on that night.
George, your last fight was against Nikolas Solly. Can you just talk us a little bit through your prep, what you knew about Nikolas and how it went? What was the end result, please?
So, preparation-wise, everything went perfect during the camp, getting ready, and then we went out. Well, I just realized from that fight that it's so different to a lot of like the fannies in MMA. So during the situation on fight days, I was by myself in the hotel. I wasn't with any coaches. My brother was like, he's a dickhead, but I care about him. He's having like the biggest fight of his life. I'm just not fazed by any of it. I get on the bus myself, and you see some people where they just can't seem to maintain any good headspace before a fight without having like cheerleaders around them and yes men. And I was just it was just weird how calm and usual it all felt. Like getting on the bus watching some Uncle Roger videos where he's taking the piss out of fried rice.
I've seen them.
And then I'm like, I get to the venue and there's kind of a bit of me like, oh, what's happened in Harry's fight? And I just think, makes no difference to me. In my fight, I've got to do. And I was just very like dialed in for that fight. And then in terms of the fight itself, just that was the first fight where I think I fought someone younger and being more mature and just had that calm through the rounds to implement a game plan.
The game plan you had, was that something that you had to stick to, or did you have to improvise whilst you were in there?
It was mostly like went as intended. There were a few different, like bigger differences that I had to do in that fight just to nullify his style that I don't normally do, that I had to change. Like I had to throw in longer combinations. I suppose the body lock takedowns are more my normal thing, but that was the main thing, like working off a jab and throwing longer combinations, which two things I don't normally do as much. Sometimes I can sit back or sometimes I can just pot shot. But like I had to make some changes in that, and then it worked out really well.
It worked for you, didn't it? And in the future, what's in the pipeline? So for you, George, what's in the pipeline moving forward?
Nothing as of yet. It's an unpredictable sport in terms of opportunities at any time, let alone during a pandemic. So it's just practice and training at the minute. What my goal is to get to this point where, my last two fights, I fight and then it's like, well, what's next? I fight, a win, and then it's like, what's next? I want to get to this point where I'll get a fight, win, and then be like, the next one's already lined up.
Right. So you want to have like a bit of a schedule. So
I want to get an active rhythm.
You've got that one that's already in the pipeline and you're working straight onto that one.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good way to have it. Are you still under contract with Bellator then?
Well, both of us, all of our fights on Bellator so far have just been one fight contract. So,
right.
Like we would be able to fight in other promotions, but it's just a lot of other promotions don't pay anywhere near as good as Bellator. So we'd rather get on Bellator than have some other fight. But I don't know, one thing I've had is my career so far, I've been quite inactive and I've had really tough competition. So I just want to get I want to get a streak of fights in. Like, I don't care if I'm still fighting the good competition. I just want to get like 3 or 4 fights in this year. Like that's my thing. But with the whole COVID stuff and the pandemic and not knowing, I can't complain if I get one or two.
With the pandemic, if there was no pandemic, Harry and George, would you stay active in other stuff like, I don't know, like grappling or jiu-jitsu tournaments, just to kind of keep you in there whilst you're, preparing or planning for your future MMA bouts?
I suppose the main issue with jiu-jitsu tournaments is that they're really boring. Like they're good when you're grappling, but it's like traveling load, paying quite a bit of money for like potentially 2 6-minute grapples.
Yeah, like I like sub only matches. I've done a few sub onlys. They're much more to my taste because you don't have to pay, and you kind of know when you're on, so you don't have to wait for hours and hours and hours and hours just sat in some sports hall.
It's a strange concept, isn't it, with as an athlete or a competitor in jiu-jitsu tournaments or sub tournaments, that you've got to pay to compete and provide an entertainment, which seems a bit strange.
I suppose with a lot of them, there's like no spectators there, is it? It's just about the competitors, so they're paying to make sure the competition can go on.
Yeah, like they've had to hire out the space and stuff.
Sure. They've got to cover their overheads, haven't they?
Yeah, there'll only be a few jiu-jitsu tournaments in the world, really, that'll have enough spectators for it to be profitable. I think 99% of them will they sort of need the admission fees to run, to cover the costs.
I think I'd still be partial to, like, I don't know what the opportunity is like in it, but a bit of Muay Thai or a bit of kickboxing, because I still watch absolutely loads of that all the time at the minute. So, and that's a bit more exciting than the whole jiu-jitsu tournament format.
Sure. Tell you what, I want to get on that QFC me. Fight the whole roster.
Well,
they're the only ones putting fights on at the minute.
I don't know about that.
They're the only ones putting fights on.
One thing I want to ask you both, did you watch the Max Holloway fight last night? And if you did, what were your thoughts on the way he performed and stood up to what he used to do before?
I think it was spectacular, definitely. I still don't think people are saying, oh, it's Max 2.0, like he's this new, totally different fighter. I thought he kind of went back to more how he fought against Ortega. Like, if you look in the second Volkanovski fight, he was very he almost had a Muay Thai stance, and he was coming in behind he was like lifting his lead leg up to cover the distance, and that was how he was getting in. Whereas he kind of went back to how he fought Ortega, just because of how Kattar fights.
Yeah.
But still absolutely spectacular. Like, he's now nearly 1,000 strikes clear of he's got the most strikes landed in UFC history. And
What did he say? How much was it? What did he get?
I think he got he attempted nearly 700 and got 445 strikes, significant strikes landed in the fight. And I think he's on 2,600 and something total strikes landed in his UFC career. And the person who's at number 2 in the records is Joanna with 1,700 and something. So he's nearly 1,000 strikes clear.
There's a big gap there between them, isn't there?
Yeah, that's mad.
So one of the interesting thing about that is, in his preparation, supposedly he didn't do sparring for that fight, which is one of the most interesting things. And that's, I think, a difference with his performance, perhaps because of not sparring as much, is how fast he came out. Maybe he just felt less worn down and he had more energy going in there. Suppose if I think when I had my pro debut, I had 2 years off just doing calisthenics, no MMA. And then I came back after 4 months of training. It was about 3 or 2 months of training, and I had my pro debut. And I suppose because I had that time off, felt a bit freer to throw certain things. I remember in that fight, just throwing knees and elbows, which obviously you can't practice in sparring, but just instinctually. I don't know if there's something in that with sparring less, allowing you just to be less stuck in a rhythm and more just express freely from the opening bell. I don't know.
I talked about pads earlier. He has a good pad man. I don't know his name, but Legacy Hawaii, he's a very Muay Thai style. He when he holds pads, he's throwing plenty of stuff back at Max, so his eyes aren't getting like detrained. He's not getting flinchy in his time without sparring.
So even when he's holding the pads for him, he's causing Max to have like that peripheral vision, not just focus.
Yeah, he's still keeping him like his reflexes sharp, but because he's doing the pads, he's not actually like chinning Max, so Max isn't taking the damage. So maybe there's something there, and there is something with sparring. You are practicing your ability not to hurt someone, if you know what I say. Like, because you got to spar, but you don't want to hurt your training partners. So it's like you're trying to practice how to fight, but you're also practicing your ability not to do damage to someone, which is counterintuitive to fighting.
Interview after the fight with Max Holloway, and that's what he said about, somebody asked him about, the no sparring thing. And he said he came by default because not this fight, the one previous, was that against Volkanovski?
The rematch.
He was saying it was all quarantine and he was just in the garage and there was just a big bag and, there was just him, his coach, and he couldn't get sparring partners. So just by default, he didn't spar. But when he thought, hey, I feel all right here. And that's kind of ingrained in him. And he thought, well, I don't really need to do all that sparring. And it seems to do well for him on this one, right?
On the flip side, he is someone who's had probably thousands of rounds of sparring before and huge amounts of fights at like the top level.
Yeah,
so it's not like you just say to someone who's inexperienced, "Oh, don't spar." I think because he's got that base, that's probably the smart thing for him to do now is spar less, because he's already got that experience. Then he can just build certain tools on pads better while saving damage. So he might get a few extra years in his career, which for him, that could be like millions of extra in the bank with like 3 or 4 fights a year.
Yeah. Like some amateur who's not had a lot of fights should probably still be doing the sparring. But he's been in the UFC since he was 20 and had nearly 30 fights in the UFC. Oh. He knows what a fight feels like. I think you're going to get, because you always get like a lot of the very new people copying every trend they see.
Yeah.
And I think it would be wise for certain people who've been in pro for a long time to just really drastically drop their sparring. But I think for a lot of amateurs and stuff, I think that they're probably not familiar enough with fighting to get away with it yet. It's one thing with Max is, even though he's landed the most strikes in UFC history, if it wasn't for Donald Cerrone, he would have taken he's also taken the most strikes to the head in UFC history. Like, he's taken like north of 900 strikes to his head in the fights in the UFC. So he does really need to start thinking about because I think with Max's style, the moment his chin goes even slightly, I think he's going to go on like a massive decline. Because Kattar landed some absolute bombs on him, but his chin kept him in there. But, him not sparring is going to keep his chin. It's going to help save it, I guess.
There was that bit where the commentators are saying stuff, and then he's kind of talking to the commentators whilst he's like matrixing away from boxing. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And what's your thoughts of that, of him talking to the commentary whilst he's? Is it because he felt so fluid and comfortable, or what?
I think it's easier to do that if you've had 4 10-8 rounds in a row against someone, and they're just kind of gone at that point. I think it's easier to do it at that point.
Yeah, if he'd have done that, I'd have been more impressed if he'd have done that at like the start of the first round when he was like dead fresh. But he was really in control of that. Like, sometimes Abdul will get us to sort of like play spar with his kids, and like they'll be like, Zara will be swinging punches at me, and I'll be looking at Abdul going, "Oh," because you're sort of in control there. Whereas it would have, it's not like Floyd Mayweather actually having conversations with the commentators in early rounds. Have you ever seen any of that, where the commentator starts asking Mayweather questions about who he thinks is going to win these basketball games, and he starts responding, and then the commentator goes, "Oh, and that's the second time Floyd has gone southpaw this fight," and Floyd turns to him, "Third," and he was right.
Well, he did amazing. I saw clips of it and I thought, man, that's just awesome what he's done. But good on him, and like you said, he's blessed.
The Blessed Express, blessed is best. It rhymes with many things, which is good attribute for that nickname.
Well, George and Harry, thank you so much. The plan is when you have your next fight, we're going to have another interview and keep the fight fans and the viewers up to date with as you go along the rest of your MMA journey. George, Harry from Combat Challenge, thank you so much, and hopefully we'll catch up with you soon, my friends.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
See you later.
Right.
Bye-bye.
See you later.